Okay, here's my audience. And I have a couple note cards if you want to take notes while I speak. Write down any questions you might have. So today I'm going to be talking on grief and ways that you can cope with such loss in your life. Sometime in your lifetime, you will be faced with the loss of someone close to you. At some point, you might even have to support someone in your life during the loss of someone in their own life. Everyone deals with these losses in different ways and makes their way through the stages of grief at different times. The Mayo Clinic defines grief as a natural reaction to loss. Grief is typically talked about during the loss of someone close to you, but it can also be involved during loss of a job or any in an important relationship. Losing someone close to you is inevitable. This is important to know the stages of grief and how you can cope and even support someone and others through such losses. The loss of a loved one is tough on anyone, and there are multiple stages you can go through during grief and the recovery/loss. I lost my dad unexpectedly almost 2 years ago, and I myself have been through all the stages as well as seen my family make their way through their stages. I have read and had firsthand experience with grief. So tonight I will first discuss what grief is. Second, I will discuss the stages of grief. And finally, I will discuss ways to cope during the loss of someone close to you. At some point, we will have or will experience grief. But what is it? According to Mayo Clinic, grief is a strong, sometimes overwhelming emotion for people. This can be strong no matter what it comes from. It could come from a loss, an illness, or even a terminal diagnosis. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines grief as a deep and poignant distress. Now that I have discussed what grief is, I will now discuss the different stages involved. There are 5 stages, and the first stage is denial. During this stage, the world becomes not important. The world is overwhelming and meaningless. You feel numb, and you are in a state of shock and denial. The second stage is anger. This is a necessary stage when dealing with the loss. Anger has no limits when dealing and managing such loss. The third stage is bargaining. During this stage, you may bargain to save your loved one's life. An example of this would be saying, I will do this if you help save my loved one. Or after they are gone, you say things like, if only we could go back to the way things used to be when they were here. Next comes the 4th step. This step is depression, and this stage feels like it's going to last forever. However, it is important to know that this isn't a stage of mental illness, but a way to deal with the loss of a loved one. Finally comes the 5th stage. This stage is acceptance. Some think this stage is confusing because they feel as if it's the okay point of being the okay point. Instead, this is when you come to terms that your loved one is no longer here and that you are now faced with your new reality. Now that we've learned what grief is and the stages involved with it, I will now discuss ways to overcome and cope with grief. With having experienced the loss of my dad not long ago, I have found many ways to cope and overcome my new reality. Teens Health magazine also wrote an article on 5 ways to cope when a loved one dies. 4 of these ways I found very beneficial to adults. The first way is to let your emotions be expressed and released. First, this is the most important thing because you never want to make yourself stop crying. It's okay to cry and it's natural to feel sad. So don't stop things that make you feel sad, like listening to songs or doing certain things. This will get better over time. Talking is the next step to help you cope. Find someone you feel comfortable talking with to share your story. It can also help to find someone to talk to who has had a similar life experience or loss like yours. If talking isn't your thing, you can always journal, and it's a really good way to release your emotions. Another helpful way to overcome grief is by preserving memories. You can do this in many ways. A few examples could be doing something in honor of them, planting a tree, or making a memory box filled with pictures or things they used to like. Finally, the best way I found to cope was through music. Music has always been a big part of my life and something my dad and I really enjoyed. I listened to songs that made me both happy and sad, and I even listened to songs that had memories attached to them, which all helped me feel better in a certain way. Tonight, I discussed what grief is. Second, I discussed the 5 stages of grief. And finally, I talked on how to cope with a loss. A loss of a loved one is tough on anyone, and there are multiple stages you go through during grief and recovery of a loss. In conclusion, remember that you are never alone when you are facing the loss of someone. There are 5 stages involved in the grieving process, and everyone will make their way through these steps in their own time and ways. It's okay to be sad, and don't rush through your 5 steps. Losing someone will never be easy, but knowing many ways to cope with the stress, it may help you or someone you know make the hard loss a little easier. So now I will invite my audience back for some questions.
Well, first I just want to give you a hug.
Oh, thanks.
I had a lot of things I wrote down actually, and I thought it was interesting how you talked about grief can be even with the loss of a job or something like a big life event, something, just the loss of something.
Yeah.
I never really thought about it like that. So I thought that was really interesting. And I also wrote down that I feel like you were very knowledgeable about this topic, and I was moved by your honesty with your experience, and I feel like it takes a lot of courage to talk about this. And I also wrote that like you said, everyone's going to deal with this in their life, and I have dealt with this in my life, and I did not know about those stages at all, and I felt like I learned a lot about from your speech. And I also wrote for your talking, you talked at a really good pace. You did not talk too fast, like really, really good, really good pace. It wasn't too fast and it wasn't too slow.
Thank you.
So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anything else?
I agree that you seemed really knowledgeable, and I liked the sourcing and everything.
Yes.
Yeah. Did a good job, and I hadn't heard about 5 stages
Yeah.
either, so it's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, you used really good, the Mayo Clinic is obviously really well known and so that was a good source to use. I really thought you did a good job.
Thank you. So good job. Thank you.